Thank you, gentlemen. This is, I'm really think we've got the right topic here. And if you look at the back of your programs, you'll see what the Camden Conference has in store for us next year, which is, this is great preparation for our examination of democracy under threat globally, I think.
It is.
Which leads me to my first question. I know we're here to explore India, but we got a lot of Americans here in the audience, and we're wondering if our Indian friends are providing a roadmap for what could happen in other democracies for moving away from the sense of liberal democracy.
So I've already used the one great American example, great in a big American example. What happened in Jim Crow South between 1890 is the beginning of Jim Crow constitutions, and by 1910, all 11 ex-Confederate states had Jim Crow constitutions, right? Depriving blacks of equality and in fact disenfranchising them. Now, that's not what you're asking. What you're asking is basically if Mr. Trump comes to power.
Can he hire a bunch of Indian political scientists in India?
Yeah.
And,
if Mr. Trump comes to power, it's clear what political scientists would say: laws versus democracy will be in conflict. Laws and democracy will be in conflict, and how democracy will be used to change some laws or change some of the constitutive principles of American constitutional post-1965 order, not pre-1960, post-1965 order. How that will be changed will be watched. Yes, Mr. Trump's rise will be electoral democracy threatening constitutional democracy. The same problem. Same problem.
Pratap?
So I have a slightly different take on this. Both our democracies are in deep trouble, but the mechanisms by which that trouble will be produced will be slightly different. In India, if Mr. Modi returns to power, which he most likely will, it will be the consolidation of a single ideology and a deeply authoritarian rule without any checks and balances. So it's more like a one-party state. And in fact, I think that's their image of democracy. The party becomes the structure through which everything in society gets mediated, including religious institutions. I think the good news, bad news story in the United States is that the United States is more divided. There are still more checks and balances in place. Mr. Bezos can run a newspaper in a way in which no Indian newspaper owner can. The distribution of popular support, and presumably the Democratic, it'll be a close election at best. So the mechanism by which you could have more trouble in the US democracy is actually more conflict rather than single-party authoritarian consolidation. And the reassuring news might be that conflict can be troublesome, but there is a possibility of more regeneration and resistance. I think if Mr. Modi were to win the majority he has now, close to 400 seats, it's actually going to be much more difficult even to contest and resist. So there it's authoritarian consolidation. In the US, the mechanism is deepening conflict and polarization.
Well, we can only hope. And, that's when that's the positive scenario. We must have some questions here. I have a million, but we're going to start with volunteer one has someone. Tell us your name and where you're from.
Hi. Oh, not me.
Well, one more second. We'll get to you in a sec.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I'm from the University of Maine, Orono. I was wondering if you could speak more on the topic of modern institutional manifestations of religious tension in India, especially concerning the treatment of Muslim Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. Thank you. Which will be also a theme that we're going to get to on a number of sessions here. But anyone want to weigh in?
So I mean, as Professor Varshney said, at one level, at least in terms of the formal structure of law, it's for the first time that the government of India is seriously beginning to discriminate between Muslims and non-Muslims. We passed a Citizenship Amendment Act that promised paths to citizenship status for a number of refugee communities from our region, in which Muslims were excluded. Now, here's the irony. A, they did not need to pass that act to actually give citizenship to, let's say, beleaguered Hindus from Pakistan. They could have easily done it under law, under current administrative process and law. The only point of that act was to actually send the symbolic message, right, that Muslims of South Asia, broadly, are going to be, in some senses, in a different category. And that's of a piece with the suspicion of, India should be like the United States, right? We should be this zone of freedom. Now, of course, there are practical problems when demographies change, and particularly when refugees are concentrated in particular India areas, like in the state of Assam, for example, after the 1971 war, right? But the idea that India should discriminate from refugees on the basis of religion, right, is now institutionalized law. And the Rohingya issue, and we used to raise the issue of Bangladeshi refugees, till we actually just discovered that Bangladesh hasn't done too badly economically over the last 10 years, and the crisis is less deep. These are favorite electoral rallying points. So I'm afraid India is not actually, despite historically being a great, at least de facto accommodator of refugees, is not going to be very welcoming of refugees.
Just one thing to add to that, I completely agree. The one addition would be that law passed in December of 2019 basically says that we will welcome persecuted minorities only from Muslim majority countries in our neighborhood. And persecuted minorities are all non-Muslim. So even if within those countries, some Muslim communities say they are a persecuted minority, for example, the Shia, the Hazara, or Ahmadis, right? That by definition, the law says, no, they are Muslim, they cannot be persecuted in a Muslim land. Only non-Muslims can be persecuted in a majority Muslim country, and only Muslim majority countries can be, if you follow this further, can persecute. Hindu majority, Buddhist majority countries next door called Sri Lanka. Hindus in Sri Lanka are a minority, right? And many of them have claimed they are a persecuted minority. And please note, Rohingya are not included in CAA, in the Citizenship Act. Rohingya are Muslim minority in a Buddhist majority state in Myanmar. They are not welcome, even if they are a persecuted minority, because they are Muslim.
We had a question here, right?
Hi, I'm George Stewart from Portland. Thank you both for your clarity and candor. How to formulate this? I'm wondering if you think the latent capacity for fascism in each individual can inform us about the popularity of our parallel process with Donald Trump and Narendra Modi.
He's assuming an inherent self-interested capacity for fascism in all of us.
I've written a bit about this. I think fascism, European fascism, was an eliminationist project. Though when it began, people didn't think it was. It was not simply making Jews second-class citizens, it was eliminating Jewry. That's what the project became. So there's a wonderful book by a Yale Law School professor on the parallels between Nazi Germany and Jim Crow South, but even that says very clearly that the Jim Crow project of America was not eliminationist. It was to make blacks second-class citizens, not eliminate them physically. Jews there was a physical elimination project in Germany. So it's not the same as European fascism, but making Muslims second-class citizens is indeed the project. It's not an eliminationist project. So that's the difference I'll draw. And I don't think that when we talk of fascism in America, it's an eliminationist project. It's simply establishing primacy of certain groups over certain other groups, as opposed to eliminating those who are going to be secondary.
It's a very powerful question. Two thoughts. One, I'm less convinced by the thought that actually the place to start is looking at our individual psychology. I mean, at one sense, it's obviously true, and I think Gandhi would have agreed with you, right? That we have to look at these deep, latent sources of violence that can be mobilized in different political contexts. But I think if you look at the kind of history from the 19th century onwards, to me, I think what's striking is, in a sense, fascism is a kind of apotheosis of nationalism. And rather than saying just every individual has this latent potential, I actually do think that almost every nationalism has a kind of potential collectivism inherent in it, almost a kind of fascist potential. Because by its very nature, what nationalism requires at some point is an erasure of individuality and plurality. Under certain conditions, it can benchmark your identity. And it's not an accident. So it's not, so there's Nazi Germany, but there's, there's Turkey and the Armenian genocide. What happens after the dissolution of the Habsburg Empire? And there's this wonderful piece by Michael Mann, The Dark Side of Democracy. This interesting question, why this conjunction of democracy and nationalism has so consistently in the 19th and 20th century not just produced genocide, that's at one, but actually pretty much everything sort of short of it. And I think the question for us to ask is, I think at this moment, particularly with all these elections coming up in the world, if the world turns more nationalistic, each of our countries gets enthralled by a kind of vicarious collective egoism, right? What its political consequences are going to be for exclusion and conflict.
I want to get back to that. We have a question that we can go to the screen for. Thank you for everybody in all the locations. Greg from Troy, will India's exclusion of large numbers of its population based on Hindu primacy and the caste system hobble the future ability to excel? Because there will be voices in India who say, this is a precursor. We can really get the job done. Hitler made the trains run on time.
So, again, very big question. So let me argue a little bit against the grain here. The caste system has hobbled India. There is no doubt about it. I mean, India's low performance in human capital, India's performance below potential. I mean, when you're basically not mobilizing the potential of a vast majority of your population, you will be, in some senses, hobbled and tied. So there's no question about it. But I think one of the interesting things that Hindu nationalism has done, and I think it's important to understand why it has the political purchase that it does. Mr. Modi himself is from a backward caste. And he has managed to produce an identification with his personal biography that is actually quite remarkable. I mean, he's one of the most gifted politicians in the annals of any kinds of politics. Let's make no mistake about it. I mean, if one distinguishes between kind of analysis and normative positions of the threat he represents. And one of the remarkable things that he has done is the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, it used to be considered a party of upper caste reaction against empowering Dalits, other backward castes. That is no longer the case. So in that sense, what he has done, actually furthered, I mean, it's a process that's been long going on, is to actually broaden the social base, even at the same time, right, as it actually excludes other religious minorities. And there's an interesting question to be asked whether there's a dialectic here. Because he also realizes that the consolidation of Hindu nationalism, this has always been a tenet of Hindu nationalism, that the consolidation of Hindu nationalism will not be possible if India deeply remains divided into its traditional caste hierarchies. That I think he genuinely believes, right? And so therefore you actually are getting some progress on that front going on for a long time. But India is still a very, very long way from us to be able to confidently say that caste will not determine your life chances.
Dr. Varshney?
I agree with this view. The fundamental principle of not only Mr. Modi's politics today, but latter-day Hindu nationalism, not original Hindu nationalism, which believed in the caste system and the caste hierarchy. And therefore, Hindu nationalists were called basically upper caste politicians. And upper caste can't add up to, we don't have the census, but if you go through sample surveys, upper caste probably are not more than 16% of India, 15 to 16% of India. So the guiding principle of latter-day Hindu nationalism, and Mr. Modi in particular, is inclusion of lower castes into the Hindu political community, which used to be dominated by, and could still be dominated to some extent, and exclusion of Muslims from that political community, right? And if you think of one of the remarkable phrases, he's very good at coming up with phrases, you know, as a fairly gifted politician, I agree. The phrases, one phrase he used for describing India's ruling elite before him, or India's ruling elite before him, he used the term Khan Market Gang. Anyone who's been to Delhi understands where Khan Market is. Khan Market is a very important central/South Delhi market where Delhi's elite would shop, and also the New York Times journalists would come and shop there, and the FT would shop there, and, you know, and the embassy people, you know, so. The term was Khan Market Gang, and Khan Market was created by Prime Minister Nehru after 1947 to celebrate one major Muslim figure of Indian freedom movement, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and his family and his son, right? And he told those Hindus coming from Pakistani Punjab, Mr. Khanna, Mr. Chopra, all Hindu names, you will get a shop. You apply for a shop, you will get a shop here, but you will be in a Khan market. The market will be called Khan Market. So what Mr. Modi meant by that, and the Indian Express then tried to dissect, what he meant by that is there is an alliance of Muslims and the ruling elite in India. That's what Khan Market Gang is. This alliance is to be broken. This is to be broken. Muslims have to be taken out of that, right? And lower caste should be incorporated in the political community. So at one level, from a purely caste angle, this is a fairly progressive move. From a purely caste angle. However, this move of including lower caste also is dialectically connected to exclusion of Muslims from the political community.
So that raises a caution for us as we try to evaluate going forward if the BJP comes in with a large majority. If we just measure the reduction of inequality in India, this inclusion of so-called backward castes might alleviate some inequality in India, but that would take our eye off the ball of the effect on the Muslim minority.
Yeah, but the project is, as Pratap rightly put it, is a very long-term project. I mean, deep-seated caste hierarchies will not disappear easily, but yes, the project is clear. Inclusion of lower castes. And that will reduce social inequality. If you're talking about economic inequality, no, that's a different ballgame. Economic Gini coefficients in India have clearly risen.
Yeah. That's the measure of
But
inequality.
social Gini coefficients, because lower castes are being incorporated in the, have gone down, not disappeared. So the social inequality, economic inequality, there will be two different things now.
Glad I asked it. Seriously. There's a question in the balcony, then we'll go to the remote question. So, right here first. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Kai Thistle from Edward Little High School in Auburn, and you spoke of the dangers of democracy without enshrined liberal freedoms, and I wanted to ask, how does India address this threat to its liberal democracy? And I guess on that point, how does any country?
So two things, or what have we learned, right? You know, we used to have a lot of faith in constitutional design, that somehow this was an engineering problem, right? Those are the big metaphors we use, separation of powers, checks and balances. And they can work to a certain degree, but unless society has an underlying distribution of power that is competitive, right? Those institutions will be knocked off like epiphenomenon. They're kind of endogenous to underlying distributions of power. But the second big lesson, right, globally, go back to Weimar Germany. So you know the amazing thing about the contemporary right-wing threats to democracy, the right doesn't splinter. The left and center forces, right, that nominally should be on the side of progressivism, right? They have two important failings, or three important failings. One, they divide too easily, right? So wherever right-wing nationalists have come to power, it's been part on the backs of left and center divisions, right? And so we have to exercise political good judgments about them. Second, and this is something Mr. Modi capitalized on, the left and center have acquired the cachet that these are elite projects. The left and center used to do mass mobilization, right? Outreach beyond elections, right? You know, we actually became social determinists. We said, look, elections is all about getting some demographic arithmetic right. You know, this racial group will vote this way, this racial group will vote that way. If we just manage these numbers, right? You know what the right has done remarkably? It has taken on the idea that political identities are constructed through the work of mass mobilization. What the first Indian nationalist movement did, Gandhi and the Congress, the right now does, right? It says we will create new ideas. It's you know, generating new identities. And the third thing which the right has done, like India, like here, is very, very cleverly said that, look, this liberal project is actually an elite project. That there is something about the social basis of this project and the idioms in which it's articulated that excludes perhaps the working class, perhaps the lower caste. So the short answer is you have to do good old-fashioned politics, right? Rather than look for engineering solutions.
Yes, the great idea of the initially was that constitutional and legal designs will ensure that the freedoms, the liberal freedoms that we're talking about, will be protected, but Constitution alone won't be able to do it. You will need some kind of popular sentiment also in favor of those projects. So the project is both constitutional and mobilizational or political. You have to do both. A purely constitutional engineering will help some, but can be defeated.
Question on the screen. Has the need to create a single narrative of India's freedom struggle cost other actors their place in Indian history? Niraj from Chennai, India asked that question.
Very big one.
Go ahead.
We are Neeraj from Chennai. Where the two kinds of, at least two actors who felt ignored by the freedom struggle elites. The lower caste politicians, especially of the South. And Hindu nationalists didn't believe. Hindu nationalists were not really in the freedom struggle. They were not with Gandhi and Nehru and others. Their main focus was, why should Muslims be important? Their main focus was not getting rid of the British. So yeah, Hindu nationalist actors and views and lower caste actors and views, they felt neglected in the freedom by the elites of the freedom struggle. One response to that, Gandhi and Nehru, I think they were remarkably intellectually capacious and politically capacious and wise political actors. The idea that for making India's constitution, the chairmanship of the committee that made India's constitution went to a Dalit, the lowest caste, is an act of great historical and political imagination. Mr. Ambedkar was India's most, conventionally speaking, most educated leader of India, with a PhD from Columbia in political and legal theory and a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics. Gandhi, Nehru, all others were called to the bar in London, but they didn't have PhDs. Mr. Ambedkar had 2 PhDs. And Mr. Ambedkar was asked by his former opponents, Nehru and Gandhi, Nehru not so much, Gandhi more, was asked by them to head the committee that will write India's constitution. It was a remarkable move on the part of the remarkable intellectual and political capaciousness here. So something was done symbolically, but lower caste definitely felt that the lower caste politicians thought that it's a lower caste, upper caste that is the biggest problem of India, not British versus the rest.
We got time, we're running out of time. Quick staccato questions, 1 then 2, boom.
Thank you for this fascinating conversation. I'm Ted Picone with Brookings and the Club of Madrid. My question has to do with putting India in the larger international context and thinking about how the government is weaponizing international influence in India, particularly against the liberal intellectuals that you mentioned before. I'm thinking of people who are like Harsh Mander and others who are being accused of tax violations and these other investigations and locking them up. What role does the United States and other international actors play, if any? And in terms of checks and balances, you haven't said too much about the independent judiciary in India and how important role they play as the United States is playing.
So,
and by the way, we also will have a panel tomorrow.
So the short answer, one is, I think this is a joint conversation of our democracies, and I certainly think the United States' moral authority in the world has never been lower than it is right now, has no leg to stand on. But more seriously, the single biggest mistake one can make, which the United States has consistently done, is to make human rights a tool of geostrategic policy. Because what you end up doing is discredited human rights. I mean, you're going to sanction India, not Saudi Arabia. What are you going to do, right? So actually, the American people, civil society to civil society conversation, but this idea that the United States can stand in judgment on the world, run the world, and make human rights a tool of geostrategic policy is a disaster for America, and it's a disaster for the rest of the world, right? So don't even, in some sense go there. And on the independent judiciary, I mean, unfortunately, it's been the first major institution to crumble. The Indian Supreme Court used to be the most powerful independent court, supposedly. And as I said, my belief as a political scientist is that judiciaries cannot resist the underlying distribution of power beyond a point.
Quick take on a giant topic?
Agreement. I think on judiciary, maybe slight disagreement, but I think it's on the whole, it's correct that judicial reasoning is not physics. There are various interpretations of the law, various interpretations of the Constitution, and judges don't apply necessarily the first legal principles, if there are any first legal principles. Judges interpret the law and the Constitution in a certain manner, and most of the time, not all of the time, which may be the slight difference here, most of the time they are not going to resist powerful executives and powerful legislatures. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they will. And because sometimes they will, and they can, and they have, in the past, we should never give up on the judiciary and its ability to correct some of the errors that polities, powerful executives and powerful legislatures run into.
And that sounds like you're talking about America also right
now.
Yeah,
I'm talking about America also. It's both. I'm talking about America also, yeah.
So we're bumping up against overtime. Save the questions that you were thinking of. I'm sure the other panels and these panelists will be back tomorrow. Sorry about that. A couple of quick things. For those of you here, refreshments, third floor, coffee, tea, water, in the Tucker room on the main level. And now for the importance of the Tucker room, during one of the breaks, stop in, if you can, here in Camden. Books by our speakers, as well as other publications on India, are available for purchase. Special thanks to Arctic Turn Books in Rockland, a wonderful place, for organizing this. Word on the street is that conference speakers would be happy to autograph books that you might be interested in taking home with you. Plan to be back here in the chairs at 11 o'clock sharp to get rocking and rolling. See you in a minute. Thank you so much, panelists.